Good afternoon and welcome to NCGR Around the World webinars. Today we have Naomi Bennett speaking on wobbles and eclipses. Naomi Bennett has practiced astrology since 1970 and was president of the Astrological Society of Austin, Texas. She teaches astrology as a branch of sacred geometry, advises clients, and is an international speaker at various astrology conferences around the world from 2014 through 2018. She has a BS in psychology and an 11-year career in computer sales and 15 years as a real estate investor. She's authored Looking at the Moon in Astrology, Moon Wobbles and Eclipses in 2018, Foundations of Astrology in 2014, and has published 2 works of Carl Payne Toby, who was her astrology mentor. Her website is www.learnastrologynow.com. She's on Facebook, and her email is naomibennett9@yahoo.com. Welcome, Naomi.
Thank you so much. I thank NCGR for hosting this. It's a real service to our community.
You're welcome.
Well, shall I take off and start or what?
Take it away.
Okay. Here's a picture of the book that I published in 2014. It's some fairly original research on the foundations of how astrology was formed in Hellenistic Egypt. And we have most of our design of astrology is based on this. The Greeks added a few errors in there that I've tried to correct, but it's meant to be a major resource for beginners and for people that are interested in how astrology was first formed. And this is the book that I've been writing now, which is on moon wobbles and eclipses. I'm actually a co-author with my mentor, Carl Payne Toby, because he originally did this research in magazine articles in 1950. And I have to thank the American Federation of Astrologers because they have a phenomenal research library. And so they have some of the few copies of the old astrology magazines. And so many of these chapters in this book came out of the old astrology magazines where Carl was a major writer during that time. And he had planned to put this into a book, but I took and extended the research through to 2018. And so there's going to almost be 120 years of data that's in this book on actual events during moon wobbles and eclipses. Let me change this view because this doesn't look right. Yeah, I think that looks better. So I always introduce this subject matter with a wonderful quote that was done by Maurice Pureau, which is, "The real voyage of discovery consists of not seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And so that's always what we're trying to do in astrology, is new original research or verification of techniques or finding new techniques. For example, David Cochran has a new version of astrology called vibrational astrology, which is really using the harmonic aspects all the way up into like 44 degrees of harmonics. So this is part of our research of improving astrology in this next century, is to take the research we've done in the 20th century, integrate it with the new translations we've done in traditional, and then finding a better form of astrology. And this Dilbert comic was supposed to be a criticism, but I really thought it was a compliment, particularly if you read the last panel, which is, "So now you use the science of astrology," and it says, "It's better than science. It's an art." And it really is. It's based on the oldest form of science, which is astronomy, but the ancients never looked at the skies without putting meaning in it. And that's part of the art of what you do in astrologers, to interpret the chart. So this is another great quote, which is, that astrology really is a language. I mean, that's part of what you do as a student, is learn how to understand and speak the language of astrology and its aspects, the signs and the houses. So I always like to teach when the sun is in Libra, which it happens to be this month, and I like to invoke Jupiter, because Jupiter is about intuition, and it's about the scientific approach, which is many times that you systematically go through various choices, and then for some reason you pick one path over the other, and that's a Jupiter function, that you're unconsciously following an instinct of your intuition to guide you into the direction where you're going. And then I always invoke Venus, because I think it is fundamental to balance design, geometry, music, and mathematics. And astrology happens to be a branch of all of those. So Venus is always another planet that I invoke to be present and to realize that we're really doing a branch of mathematics, which is geometry. So for example, this is one of my teaching slides, but there's a new way, or a different way, to take the old language and modernize it, which is you could take the masculine or the feminine, and really when you do that division, you're talking about duality, yin and yang, past and future. And so when you do a horoscope, you're really freezing a moment in time where you're balancing past and future. And so another way to look at a horoscope, if you're going to analyze it, is to say, is it dominated by the past, which is the feminine, or is it dominated by the future, which is the masculine? And notice that we have sacred geometry here, which is that in the feminine signs, you have the earth and the water, which wind up being triplicities. They're exactly opposite each other. So water always balances earth. And then on the other side, that the masculine signs are fire and air. And you always find fire in opposition to air. And so you have not only quadruplicity, triplicity, and then also just the duality of opposites, which is two-ness. And so there's a whole lecture that can go on this, but this is the fundamental form of how astrology is designed. That's why I connect geometry, astrology, and Venus together, because it's about balance and design. So here's a picture of Carl Payne Tobey, who was my teacher back in the 60s and 70s, and I worked for him for a while. Most people have forgotten about him because he's no longer in publication, which is why I have republished his works, because he was our first statistician. We always hear about Michel Gonquin, but Carl Tobey in the 20s and 30s and 40s did huge statistical research trying to verify various principles in astrology. And so I'm trying to leave that as a resource for our community so we don't forget his major contributions to American astrology. And in this particular presentation, we're going to be talking about Charles Jane too, because he did major research in eclipses, and he realized the value of the square aspect, which is what we call the moon wobble, that those were important too. And if we have any traditional astrologers who are listening in, the old traditional term for this aspect are lunar bendings, and we'll go into that. So the modern term is moon wobble, and you'll see why. And then the older term, if you're going to go to older authors that are several hundred years old, then you would go into the term lunar bendings to pull that up. So, for example, since we're talking about the moon, one of Carl's discoveries was that he, during the time of the 30s, when all the astrology magazines got their starts, why they collected money soliciting to do horoscopes and predictions for the readers. And so he collected the flow of money into the owner of this astrology magazine, and he did it multiple times over time. But what he found was that the high, when the greatest income came in, is when the moon was in your personal sun sign. So if you happen to be a sun in Sagittarius, then when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it's your best days of the month. And then the opposite, Gemini, would be your cycle low, when you have less luck, less income, or maybe poor decisions. So with this study that Carl had done, what he realized, and he followed his gambling, because in those days he gambled, he followed his winnings and losings, and he found that he won more in his cycle high and lost more in his cycle low. So when he made elections, when he made business meetings, he would always try and plan the meeting in his personal cycle high. So this is a little tip to you as astrologers, is when you're doing electional astrology or you're planning to have important meetings, try and do them when the moon is in your sun sign. So since we're going to be talking about the moon and we're going to be talking about the lunar nodes, we need to understand their measurements. So in the ancient world, they used stone circles to measure the year. And many stone circles not only followed the sun, but it followed the cycle of the moon and the lunar nodes. And so you can see from this example, and Stonehenge does this, but many stone circles do, is they not only tracked, let me put an arrow here, the winter solstice, which is 0 Capricorn, when the sun is at its lowest declination in the year, but they track the summer solstice when it's at its highest declination of the year. And those are called lunar standstills, because for 3 days, literally the moon doesn't move. The sun, it comes up, stands at its highest point, and then it finally cycles back down. And so those were major measurements of the year. In fact, in the ancient world, the most common New Year's was at 0 Capricorn, which was the New Year, which is why we have Christmas so close to the winter solstice, because our Julian calendar has moved. But they were trying to, in the Christian world, take over the pagan holidays, which was Saturnalia, which is why we have 12 days of Christmas, because Saturnalia lasted 12 days of celebrating. But they also, that's why you have Christ born on December the 25th, because originally the date was the winter solstice, which is currently December the 21st. But also in the ancient world, particularly in Egypt, where horoscopic astrology started, why they measured from the summer solstice, and that would have been the first day of Cancer. And so that's a major, major player. And we happen to be during Rosh Hashanah, and for the Jewish calendar, they consider their new year to be in the equinox, which is 0 Libra. And then you happen to have the Persians, who kept astrology alive when, after the collapse of Rome, it disappeared from the Western world for almost 600 years. They celebrate their new year in the springtime at the equinox. But the most common time of year in the northern hemisphere, that the new year was in the winter. So let's do a basic diagram so we can understand what is the foundation astronomically of eclipses and moon wobbles. So normally, when we're tracking two different planes, we're tracking the Earth's orbit, which happens to be the eclipse. You could either call it the Earth's orbit or you could call it the sun's orbit, one of the two, but it's both the ecliptic. And then we have the tilt of the moon, which has its own angle. So this is the angle of the moon. And when we happen to have the moon crossing the same point as the lunar nodes with the ecliptic, and we have the moon come here, then we'll have an eclipse, either of the sun or of the moon. In fact, you can have pairs or 3 of them at one time. But at the 90-degree point right here that I've labeled moon wobble and moon wobble, you can have an eclipse-like period of time, which is what we're in right now. It's the moon wobble period. It's going to be exact October the 6th, but we're in it. It's forming now. And you can see the amount of news that happened last week. It was very dramatic. And so that's very indicative of an eclipse-like period, except we don't actually have the covering of the sun or the moon. Instead, we have a 90-degree angle that the ancients recognized, the traditional astrologers recognized, and we want to bring it back out and be very conscious to the modern astrologers, current astrologers, realizing this is an eclipse-like period. So here's another typical diagram. Maybe it's easier here, that when the nodes cross our ecliptic, we'll have an eclipse, but when it comes at what they call the lunar bendings, at the very top at the 90-degree angle, you will have a lunar bending or a moon wobble. So I don't think I can show this any bigger. I'm wondering if I can make these slides larger. Let me escape out. Say I play it, but I wanted to go full screen. If I can get, come on. See if we have full screen, and well, we do have it full screen. Does that look bigger to all of you? Yes. In this mode?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can read it.
So I had done this quickly. This is my little pocket ephemeris, but I wanted to show you how you can find this in an ephemeris. And so I had already marked it up for the year. This was in 2018, where you can see all my notations that I do at the top. But this is how you find where you're going to get eclipses and moon wobbles. So it happens to be in October that I see the sun here at 1 Scorpio, October the 24th. But I go down and I look for the nodes of the moon when they're exactly at 1, I think this is Leo here, isn't it? Yeah, 1 Leo. And so I know when it's the same degree that that is the exact date of a moon wobble. And I can't remember, I showed them next. So that's how you find them on an ephemeris. Of course, you could do that electronically on your computer. But this is where you look for them, is to find that exact 90-degree aspect. And then usually I consider it beginning about a week before and then fading a week after. And I think I have a second. Nope. I'm messing around with this right now simply because I couldn't, nope. I'm trying to get the slide to move. Escape. Wait 1 second. I'm trying to get my, all right, play. I wonder why it shows it smaller when I play it. All right, so now this is a page on your solar eclipses, because there's a technical factor, which is you can have a moon wobble during an eclipse period too. So what is my definition? It's when the lunar node is exact with the degree of the sun. So in this example, we happen to have a solar eclipse. It was on February the 15th. But what I note is that the moon wobble was earlier in the month, because here's the degree of the sun at 14 Aquarius, and I go down and I see that the north lunar node is at 14 Leo. So even during an eclipse period, you can have a moon wobble, because we have no definition in astrology of when the lunar node is exactly at the same degree as the sun, because we emphasize when the moon comes involved, and you can see the moon is at 22 Aquarius here. When the new moon becomes involved, we have an eclipse. It could be a solar eclipse or it could be a lunar eclipse. In this particular page, it happens to be a solar eclipse. What I wanted to show you is that pay attention when you're in an eclipse period, that you pay attention to the degree of when the sun and the nodes are the same degree, because that could be an important period too. And so you don't want to just pay attention to the day of the eclipse. You really want to, the real power of an eclipse is the moon wobble when the sun and the lunar nodes are in the same degree. And then during that period, you can have a solar or a lunar eclipse, or sometimes all three. And so that's the distinction we wanted to make. And I wanted to make a comment too about paying attention to out of bounds planets. If we go back, you could never be, let's go back further here. Nope. This one. You can never be out of bounds when you're within the degrees of the sun, which is 23 degrees, 26 minutes north or south. But there are times when the moon will go above that time. It's called a standstill of the moon. The extremes of the moon, whether they're below or above the extremes of the sun, and those are out of bounds planets. And many times we will have a greater eclipse period if we happen to have planets like the moon that is out of bounds. Venus can go out of bounds. Pay attention if Mars goes out of bounds. Saturn can never go out of bounds. And of course, Pluto's almost out of bounds all the time. And so I wanted to show you the astronomy of what it looks like to be out of bounds. And this was very rare that Mars was out of bounds in 2018 in Sagittarius, which it never does. If you've ever listened to Nick Dagenbest, he particularly specializes in Mars out of bounds, along with Tony Howard. He specializes in out of bounds too. But if we happen to look, we can see Mars coming right here in Capricorn. And this is what a physical retrograde looks like in the sky. I think it goes forward here. It goes retrograde, and then it goes forward here. All right. So let's go into some of the data as to why we want to pay attention to moon wobbles, because you have dramatic mundane events occur. And what happens many times is you can have dramatic loss of life. And so Carl studied all the fire data in the United States from 1943 and 1945, and he couldn't find anything astrological that was significant until he finally pulled out and only did the fire data that had loss of life with it. And then he analyzed that, and what he discovered, that here you are at 0 degrees, that's when you would have a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, that you have a dramatic jump in loss of life by fire during eclipse periods. But you also have a very dramatic loss of life during the 90-degree aspect. That is during the moon wobble, the 90-degree aspect. And they were statistically significant. So the point is that you're going to see world events occur more often during eclipse periods and moon wobbles. You'll see wars begin and end. We've already had 3 earthquakes already during this moon wobble period just last week. And of course, we've had the flare-up with Brexit, with Boris Johnson, and now with Trump, with this new scandal with the telephone call with Ukraine. So we want to pay attention to these time periods. You're your clients will wind up having dramatic events if these eclipses and moon wobbles fall on their chart. So here is an example of the most extremes that comes out of the book that I'm publishing, where you can see the most dramatic periods of moon wobbles. And I specifically pick the worst of them because that shows you the force that can happen. But what's also interesting is if you have an eclipse period with a dramatic aspect like Mars or Uranus or Pluto, you wind up having more extreme periods. And so, for example, you can see the Oklahoma City bombing when it occurred that Uranus was in Aquarius and with the lunar nodes during that time period, just like the Challenger explosion, that we had Pluto squaring the nodes at the same time. Whereas in Columbine, you didn't have those specific aspects. You have 9/11 was during a moon wobble, which most astrologers don't recognize, but it was during an eclipse, a moon wobble period. And you can see the actual date. The moon wobble is exact on the 24th, and the date of the event is the 11th. So it's within that time period. That's when the Columbia spacecraft exploded. In fact, it exploded over Texas. So I'm living in Austin, Texas, so I remember that event very well because they had people combing all over the land of Texas trying to pick up every single scrap of the Challenger going down, not the Challenger, the Columbia going down, trying to figure out why it exploded. I think it was some of the heat shields had fallen off and it couldn't take it anymore. The tsunami that occurred in Indonesia was during an eclipse period. See, it happened on the 26th, and the exact moon wobbles on the 17th. We had the London bombing, and the Chinese earthquake happened in May, and it was only a day off from that particular moon wobble. And I remember in particular, if I remember right, there was something going on with near zero Aries because China responds very heavily with early degrees of cardinal. And that was just before China was hosting the Olympics, was in that same year, 2008. And this was a major earthquake. And notice that Mars was conjunct the nodes. So this is an example of how you can start tracking that. Here's another page of it. These floods in India, notice Pluto, you can have massive weather events when the nodes and Pluto are together. And in India, it wasn't just one small period. They had massive floods for almost a month when Pluto was with the nodes. So always pay attention when Pluto comes with the nodes because you'll have extreme weather events. The Oakland Bay Bridge failed during this same time period. They're within the same month. And notice what happened here. We had three major events, actually four. Right here in 2010, Rio had tremendous floods. We had the volcano explode in Iceland, and that disrupted air traffic across Europe for about a week or two. I know because I was flying over and I had to figure out when to fly over and not, because they were closing down the London airports as whether or not I could get in. Another Chinese earthquake during that time, and for us in the US, we had the Deepwater Horizon accident in the Gulf of Mexico. So dramatic periods. And then this was very important in 2011, is we had the Arab Spring start in Egypt. Remember, it started in Tanzania in December, but it wasn't until this moon wobble period in February and an alignment of planets in the sign of Aries that the Arab Spring actually erupted in Egypt. And what we forget that was also the rise of the 99%, where we had people coming from all over the world rising up against the rich and the corporations, happened during this same time period. And when they rose up in the Arab Spring, I remember they also started going across the Middle East, India. There was a rising up in China, which the Chinese quelled very quickly, and the U.S. let it continue for some months. They quit during the winter. They tried to revive it the next year, but perhaps you don't remember it. But all the police departments across the major cities in the United States all coordinated the same week and shut down all of the 99% tanks and the sit-ins that they had started the next year. They shut that down and eliminated that in the U.S. A little note about our police departments. And then we had Fukushima. Fukushima, and we'll look at the chart for this, was very dramatic because of Uranus and Pluto. And then we had the Ukraine revolt that happened in 2014, and it was conjunct Uranus too. So these are examples that you can see that you wind up having major events. Now, in 2018, during a moon wobble, we had a series of events. If you'll track your mundane events, if you want to test astrology, follow the aspects with the news. And it was more than interesting to watch this event that happened, that we had a tsunami in Indonesia. But this is when Khashoggi was murdered. But it wasn't until the moon wobble, and it had an exact square in cardinal on October 24th, that we started getting news completely of his murder. But notice, he was murdered in Istanbul. We happened to have the Kavanaugh vote. I forgot about that. Then on October the 12th, Mohammed bin Saud, who's the new prince of Saudi Arabia, he was implicated in Khashoggi's death. We had a major derailing in Taiwan. The Dow drops 600 points over 3 days. Here's the exact moon wobble itself. We had 12 bombs in the mail to various people in Congress. There's the synagogue shooting. There's a plane crash. We had the midterm elections, and this is when Jeff Sessions was fired, and the mean nodes move into Cancer Capricorn. I have to look at that. That may be, yeah, that was for the 2018. So we wanted to follow up of why this particular moon wobble, let's go back, this particular moon wobble on October the 24th was so dramatic. And that's because we had to look at declinations too. So this is just a little clue. If you want to be able to measure the strength of these moon wobbles, you have to see what is in hard aspect, that is the conjunction, the square, and the opposition to the moon wobble. And you also wanted to look at the declinations to see if they're in alignment with each other. And so here we have shaded that we see Venus is with this particular moon wobble. Here it is. Here's the square right here. Venus is with there. We wouldn't normally think that Mercury and Jupiter or Mars was an aspect because this is 16, 21, and 26. But if we go over to the declinations, we realize that Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter are all within a degree of the same declination as the lunar nodes. So here, even though we don't see this alignment completely in longitude, if you want to look at extra strength, don't forget to look at the declinations. They are a clue as to whether a particular event, like an eclipse or a moon wobble, is going to have extra power, is to look at the lunar nodes. I don't know if look at declinations. I don't know if I put in the heliocentric planetary nodes here, but they will add strength too. We'll see. So we'll skip this slide unless do we have any Vedic astrologers? that are in our viewers, because this is basically showing the same event, the same chart, but in a Vedic perspective, because I sometimes speak to Vedic astrologers, because it doesn't matter whether you're in a round chart or a square chart, you're still going to have a moon wobble that's 90 degrees, and they look at the aspects. So this was interesting. This is a bi-wheel, and we have on the inside of it, we have the actual disappearance of Khashoggi. And we had an exact time of him of 1:14 when he disappeared off of the streets of Istanbul and went into the Iranian embassy, where basically they killed him almost immediately. And then we have the birth date of Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We don't have a time of day. What I wanted to point out in this, because this is the controlling event, is look at the lunar nodes of the prince across Venus. And remember, Khashoggi was a member of the inner circle of the Saud family, but he had criticized the Saudis enough that he finally went out of country to New York. So he had a personal relationship with the prince, and it happens to be that relationship of the event is Venus is going across those nodes of the princes. And then look at this, is that we have this opposition of Jupiter and Venus across the nodes of the event with Mars. So remember, when we went back here, we had all these declinations of tying in Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and Mars. And then when we go to the chart, we see that the prince has an alignment. The prince in his own chart has Venus opposition Jupiter, and he's doing this bloody event. Mars is related to knives and disasters and violence, personal violence. And here he loses his life with this aspect with the prince's Venus and Jupiter in alignment with the event and with the nodes. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Now, we'll skip this one. Now let's flip it over and do the opposite. This is during the time period when the prince was discovered to have a connection with Khashoggi. And so this is when he publicly gets embarrassed. So this time we have the prince on the inside, and we have the moon wobble of the 24th on the outside. And so here again, here's that Venus-Jupiter combination with the nodes. Now they have moved off slightly, but look what it's tying in with him is as the moon happens to be with the nodes, and it's across his Pluto and with Venus. And so he did a very military styled event where he sent his personal bodyguards basically to wipe this guy out. And then his deed becomes discovered by the world during the moon wobble period, because it had occurred a little earlier. So this is what's really curious. This is going to tie in to what we're seeing right now with Trump and with Boris Johnson with Brexit, and with Trump. They seem to be interlaced with each other. So this is another way. This is with solar fire. This is using the graphic ephemeris, which I love doing, because then you can track a series of events together. And I want to point out that Mars was out of bounds. Remember, we talked about planets get more extreme when they're out of bounds. And this was a dramatic, extreme Mars event that literally he walked into the embassy. They had taken butcher knives and bone saws through airport security, the team from the prince's personal bodyguards, and they literally cut him apart in pieces and made him disappear. you couldn't have a more literal Mars event. But notice that Mars was out of bounds, and they did this extreme act with Mars out of bounds. So we want to look at this eclipse period, and this is the Prince's aspects. And so we notice, and we can see here that we have a solar eclipse on July, we have a lunar eclipse on the 29th, an eclipse here, and here is the moon wobble of the actual act. But look at Mars. Mars was doing this retrograde action against the princes, Pluto, Venus, Jupiter, and lunar nodes. So Pluto is extreme. Venus is with friendships. Jupiter can be with countries outside or foreigners. And where was this done? This was done in Istanbul, Turkey, not on Iranian soil. And maybe you don't remember the story on this, but he was tricked to come all the way back to Turkey because he was going to marry a young woman, Muslim faith, in Turkey, and he had to. The Saudis said he had to go back to the Saudi embassy in Turkey in order to get this marriage recognized or something. I don't know what the legal things were, but they forced him to come out of the United States, fly to Turkey, and go to the embassy in order to marry this woman. So we have this trickster event, but notice this probably, he was very angry. The prince was very angry and resolved that he was going to do something about Khashoggi. And more than likely, he made this decision as early as July to set up the plan, but it was actually actualized here in October the 24th. Then notice the out of bounds Mars that happened during this time period when Mars was out of bounds, and that this happened. Very interesting. So I don't want to overemphasize, but we rarely have all of these exact events recorded. So let's look at what Khashoggi has on his side, because that's interesting too. So we have the date he disappears. That is what's controlling the inner wheel and the houses. And then this is Khashoggi on the outside. Sometimes I will flip and reverse my charts because the event can tell you more. And it happens to be that on the ascendant in Istanbul, when he walks through the door, his Saturn, his own Saturn, happens to be on the ascendant. That's a death aspect, that he's walking into a trap. And notice that between the event, so here is the nodes, and here is the aspect with the nodes, with Uranus and Venus. And where does it aspect and fall in Khashoggi's chart? Neptune. He was deceived and lied to that this was going to occur. And notice it's in the 11th house. He's on foreign soil in the 11th house because he's trying to get married to someone. And then the emphasis of deception and possible death occurs during the event time. These are the odd synchronicities that occur. And so I just point that out, that when you are starting to look at personal charts with major events, that you want to look at the event as controlling the houses besides just looking at the person. It may reveal more information to you than you would think. I forgot to stop earlier, particularly when I was describing the how to find the nodes in an ephemeris. Do we have any outstanding questions at this point? Anything that someone's burning to know?
I have a question, Naomi, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Is the moon wobble only applicable when the moon squares the node?
No. They're applicable in eclipses too. Let me get back and see if I can go to the navigator and find that slide, because I don't measure eclipses like other astrologers do, and I'll tell you why. I've had so much practice. Now, I wonder if I can get up here and make this bigger. I'm trying to, let's see if I can. Keynote, format view. Let's go to full screen. Oh, it still didn't show full screen. It's not going to show it any better. All right. So I always, when I look at eclipses and the eclipse period, I always look at the degree of the node. I think that the node and the sign and the degree it in is far more important than the day of the eclipse, whether it's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. This is the degree, the nodes are the degree that is really controlling the aspect. So yeah, in this particular example, even though the eclipse is on February 15th, I noted in my ephemeris that the moon wobble was on the 3rd. To me, that was the center of the aspect. And then you're just waiting for the alignment of the moon and the sun to come for the eclipse. So when I go through and measure eclipses, I don't use the sun degrees, which is what most astrologers would use. They would say this eclipse was at 26 degrees Aquarius. For me, no. I measure that. That's a 14-degree Leo Aquarius eclipse. In my research, this is where the strength of the aspect is. So I measure from where the lunar nodes are. I don't measure from where the sun is with the moon that creates an eclipse. But most astrologers do this.
No, I get this, but it has to be a square, right? It can't be an opposition. It has to be.
No.
Oh, it can be. Okay.
Yes. So this particular example I'm giving you is an eclipse period, and I'm showing you that there's a moon wobble occurring, which is when the sun is the same degree as the lunar nodes, which is 14 and 14.
Okay.
14 and 14. So within an eclipse period, there will be a moon wobble too.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
I got it. Yep.
Now let's see.
So the moon question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So the moon wobbles only when the sun and the moon are at the same degree, or no?
Yes, that's the definition of when it is exact. Now, you're going to have a period of time when it's forming and it's separating, but it's the same degree will be the exact center of the moon wobble. But just like when you have eclipse periods, you'll measure how long you think that aspect is forming. And for example, our next moon wobble is October 6th, but it's obvious when the sun moved into Libra, that we started already having moon wobble events, which was Boris Yeltsin. Remember, it was just a week ago that while Boris Yeltsin, he shut down Parliament, and then the Supreme Court, their Supreme Court ruled against him. And that was practically the day after the moon had moved into Libra, and I counted that the beginning of this particular moon wobble period, and I would give it a week after. Let's go back. Let's see where we are.
You give it what, a week after to be exact? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I give a week before and a week after at least. Now, if you happen to have some other planets that happen to be involved, then you're going to expand out the length of that period, because if you had Mars in alignment, for example, it will start creating action earlier than normal. Or if it lined afterwards, you would have more events occurring after than normal. If you look at these world events we listed here, for example, you can see that Pluto here is a modifier. And look, the month, April the 4th, the 14th, and the 20th, and we have this entire series of events because we happen to have that moon wobble occurring in a cardinal sign, and it was a grand cardinal. And here during February, uh, of the 11th. No, I think it's the next one. Does it? Nope, nope. That we, is it the one? No, it was 2011. Do we have it here? No. That we had not only the Arab Spring, but the tsunami and Fukushima, and they all occurred at different times. But you can see the center was on the 20th, but the event was on the 11th, because Uranus and Pluto was involved. And so when you have other planets involved, you're going to modify how long you think this is going to be effective, how extreme it is. Remember, we had we also had Mars on Shikogi, that retrograde Mars in the rare sign of Sagittarius and out of bounds modified that moon wobble, and it made it more extreme, which is why there was such a bloody event with Khashoggi. So that's why I mean, we could do a plain vanilla, it's just the sun and the moon in the degrees. But if you have transiting planets involved, if you have declination involved, then you're going to modify how long you think it's going to occur.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you went over this already, but I came in a little bit late. Is there a source for when these moon wobbles are happening?
Your ephemeris, you have to look them up. Let's see if we go back. I showed you that this is an example. This is where you find them. You want to find when your sun is in hard aspect to the lunar nodes. So on this particular page, it was 14 Leo, and the sun is at 14 Leo, and you'll have a moon wobble. But the square aspect is the one we're particularly emphasizing today, because it's the one that most astrologers don't follow. And so you want to pay attention to the squares and the conjunctions. So you'll have a moon wobble during an eclipse period, but you'll have the square, which is what we're in right now. Okay, let's go back. And as I said earlier, pay attention to the declinations, because they're another additive factor that will make things more unusual or more dramatic. And I don't have it in my charts, but I will tell you a story. And I think I can't remember if it probably involved an eclipse period or moon wobble period. I had a client. It was an unusual combination of time periods, because this engineer manager in high tech came in, and he wanted to divorce his Indian-born wife. They had 2 children. And then 6 months later, his wife came in, and it was halfway through, because they didn't have the same last names. I didn't realize who she was until halfway through the reading, and realized that this was the man's wife. And she wanted me to give her Indian remedies. And what do you want to say? Mudras or chants, anything to stop him from divorcing her. But I already knew his chart, and I knew his intention, and I said, no, 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 no. What you need is a good divorce attorney, because I don't think you're going to be able to stop this. And so a year or so passes by. He comes in for another reading, and he has this rare event of Mars out of bounds and retrograde going slowly across his Venus. And it's the only time in my career that I told a client this. I said, this is an incredible period of time. This is not usual. This is the kind of time where the police are going to come knocking on your door in the middle of the night. You have to pay attention to this, because this is a very unusual aspect, and it's violent, and it's a very emotional. And he left thinking I was nuts. And, you know, so what can I say? So then I read the paper months later. It was on February the 14th. So he had come months before, and his ex-wife had tried to kill and murder their 2 children because he was out with his current girlfriend on Valentine's Day. He gave the kids to her, and she was so upset because she was still in the gigantic no about the divorce that she attempted to kill them, and then she called 911. She had poisoned them, and they had taken them to the hospital and pumped their stomachs out. They lived, but the police came knocking on his door in the middle of the night to tell them what had happened. And I won't tell you the names, but it was public information because it was in the paper. And she wound up going to jail for attempting to kill her children. It's a sad story, but
Wow.
when you have a retrograde Mars or it's out of bounds, like Khashoggi, you pay attention to those things, and maybe it's only once in a lifetime, but that's the power of some of these aspects. So that's why we talk about them, because they're worth paying attention to and noticing in your chart with your clients, and of course world events. But the bulk of the book that I do is mostly on world events to show how powerful the aspects are. Okay, are we done with our questions right now?
I have one more, Naomi.
All right.
What if you see in a birth chart someone has exact sun square lunar nodes? I mean, is that...
We have Donald Trump, who was born during a lunar eclipse, so he's got sun conjunct the lunar nodes.
Mhm.
And I'm going to bring up the chart of Joe Biden, who was born during a moon wobble.
Okay, thank you. All right.
He happens to be involved. So when you have those things activated, then people get into the news, or you have events. I will tell another story that I was teaching basic astrology classes when I was running our local astrology group here. And this young man came in out of the blue. And so I wanted to engage him. So I asked for his birth data, and we pulled up the chart. And I knew we had just gotten through with a moon wobble. And I pulled up a graphic ephemeris. And the nodes had just gone across his Venus. I didn't know him from Adam. I asked who he was, and I said, it looked like there's a change in your personal relationships. You know that if you had a girlfriend, that there was a major, someone came or left out of your life because it was on his Venus. And I said, so what happened during this last time period? And he said, my wife divorced me. He had been in the military, and who knows, maybe he was PTSD. And maybe it freaked him out because he just came out of curiosity. I happened to ask the right question, got an answer, and I never saw him again. But you want to pay attention when those nodes cross, particularly with an eclipse or with a moon wobble that crosses your chart. Let's see, this is Khashoggi. We just got through with Khashoggi disappears. But isn't that interesting that his Saturn was on the ascendant when he walked into the embassy, and that on the event chart that Neptune was in the 11th house, so he was deceived about having to get some sort of marriage certificate for him to marry the person. And that's how they got him into the embassy. We don't need to look at that. So, I am going to put up, this is a picture that's worth taking a picture of if you have an ability to do that. Oh, let's see. This is sidereal. We don't want those. Oh, I guess I don't have the helio. We're going to talk about a little bit about planetary nodes too, because we want to look at one of the big event charts, which is Fukushima. what made that moon wobble different? What was the event that changed everything? And remember, Fukushima is still alive and active, and we're not done with it. Whether you hear about it in the news or not, they have millions of gallons of radioactive water that they're storing, trying to cool off those power plants that had exploded, and they're running out of space. And remember what this event was? There was the tsunami, and then the tsunami wiped out 3 of the reactors. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, but we saw at least 2 explosions of the reactors, and literally they went into meltdown. They melted down into the earth. They broke down to the concrete. They started polluting the groundwater, and they had to plug that up too. They're still very hot. They're still taking the rods out. They haven't totally decommissioned both of those. They're still working on that, and they're using massive amounts of water to be able to clean up the mess. But look at the event chart. This happened exactly at 3:36 p.m. I think it was the day after the tsunami. But we want to pay attention to various parts in the chart because it gives you additional information. This is why you want to look at declinations, and you want to look at your heliocentric planetary nodes because they will give you more info. It was a moon wobble. So we see that the lunar node is at 28 Gemini and the sun's at 21. So we're actually 9 days away from the full moon wobble, but we're in a moon wobble period. And notice that the day of this explosion, Uranus literally went over into 0 Aries that very day. So the tsunami was the day before, and Uranus it deals with explosions. And then the other important thing we wanted to look like is that Pluto was in Capricorn too, but we had an explosive event. And look over here, here's a declination chart, and we see that the moon is out of bounds. Here's the moon, and it's exactly square Mars by 1 degree off, but it's on the node of Uranus. The planetary nodes of Uranus again reinforces an explosion. And when you look at an event chart, the moon represents the people of the earth, literally the entire population of the earth, the people. And it's a Mars event, an accident with a moon wobble, with the nodes of Uranus and the sign of Uranus moving into the sign of Aries. And for me, I am a believer that Pluto is the ruler of Aries, and Pluto is associated with atomic energy and nuclear explosions. So that, for me, gives an association that Uranus had moved into the sign of Aries, ruled by Pluto. That's another lecture. But the importance of this chart is looking at the heliocentric nodes, the moon wobble, and that the moon was out of bounds, just as a slight lesson. And we don't have to show this. This is the sidereal chart of it. Do I want to talk about this? Oh, Roy Moore was running for office. I can't remember if it was Senate. I think it was senator. And it came out during the moon wobble that he was a pedophile, that he had solicited young girls over and over through his life. And I thought it was interesting that the transit for his chart was that this came out, the explosion of it came during the moon wobble. What was interesting is that the sun was in Scorpio, the sign of sex, and that the nodes, the lunar node at 19 was on the Mars node. The heliocentric nodes of Mars is at 19 Scorpio. So we have this double emphasis that the moon wobble occurred on the node of Mars and the sun was in Scorpio, the sign of Mars. And here we had a sex scandal. He was defeated. I understand he's going to try and run again. So this is an old timeline, but we're gonna, when we get done with the charts, we're gonna go over with solar fire and look what's happening now. I want you to pay attention because we're coming up to the end of the time period when the nodes, the lunar nodes, went into Cancer, Capricorn. When he got elected and went into office, we still had the nodes were in the signs of Leo and Aquarius. And if you remember, he has Leo rising at 29 degrees Leo, and he has Mars on the ascendant. Literally, when the nodes moved into Cancer and Capricorn during that time period, May 19th was our first moon wobble in Cancer and Capricorn, and it was during that period that Robert Mueller was appointed as special prosecutor to look into the allegations of his election and the obstruction of justice. So I want to point out that we have lived under this time period of Mueller through a Cancer Capricorn lunar nodes, and we have the last moon wobble is this month, October 6th, and the last eclipse is going to be on Christmas Day, I think, December 25th, when it's in Cancer and Capricorn before it moves backwards into Gemini and Sagittarius. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when you have the nodes going through these signs, they colorize a time period that lasts for about 18 months, I believe it is, 18 months to 20 months, when the nodes will stay into one sign, and it actually can color the time period that you live in. And you'll see in Trump's chart that the transit of these nodes through Cancer and Capricorn have colored his entire presidency since the first moon wobble and the appointment of Mueller. And we're about to see the end of those nodes very quickly. So this is his chart. And what's not mentioned in this chart is that his Mercury, and you can see it's in Cancer. Whenever you have a planet in Cancer or Capricorn, you want to go look very quickly the declinations because they might be out of bounds. His Mercury is out of bounds in his natal chart. And so he just cannot stop himself from talking and going off at the mouth or tweeting. No one can stop him. They tried to take his phone away and he wouldn't have it. So he tweets at will and he says whatever he wants to at the top, up the top of his head. And that is that out of bounds Mercury that he just does not have a sense of self-control. And so here is the first time where the nodes are moving off. May the 19th, 1917, are moving off and going into Cancer Capricorn. And we have Trump's aspects in 2017. What I wanted to point out is what we have, and I don't see the dots down here, on a 90 degree. Is everyone familiar with a 90 degree ephemeris? Do I need to explain what this chart is? I will anyway. So if we want to see a transition of transits across someone's chart over a period of time, we can use the 90 degree ephemeris. This only will do hard aspects because it only goes 90 degrees, but those are the most important, the conjunctions, the squares, and the oppositions. So you would have to do a separate chart if you want to do sextiles and trines, because if you put it all in one chart, like a 30 degree dial, you'll get so much you can't read it. And so what I always look at across someone's personal chart is I look to see where the nodes are transiting, and they were transiting across his midheaven in Taurus, his Mars in Leo, his part of fortune in Aquarius, and his ascendant. And then it goes back up, and it goes up into his Cancer signs. Okay, so you notice that we have a moon wobble happening right here. So when we take the sun, I draw the sun, and wherever it crosses a lunar node, I'm either going to have an eclipse period, such as here. This happens to be a lunar eclipse. This happens to be a solar eclipse. But if I track the sun, this date, just a few days ahead of time, is a moon wobble. So here I track the sun. Here's another moon wobble. Here's a lunar eclipse, a solar eclipse, and in between them is the moon wobble. And here is the sun, and I have another moon wobble here. This is how you want to plot that across a client's chart. And this is during the investigation. And let's see. Oh, this takes us all partly to 2019. What I'm emphasizing in here is looking at that node, and we have the nodes transiting all the way through his cardinal planets that he has. And he has mostly Venus and Saturn and Jupiter at this time period. Oh, and then, oh, this is that same time period. I can't remember. Oh, let me go back to my navigator for one reason. Let's see, view with the navigator. To quickly go back to that slide of Khashoggi. Here it was. No, I thought we had another event during there, but we didn't. I thought we had a timeline of this one. Oh, here's the Trump timeline, 2017, the obstruction of justice, and the moon wobble of 2017. Okay, that's not going to give it to me. Let's see, where were we? Were we here? No, we're here. All right. I didn't update this chart from the last lecture. What I wanted to point out, and we don't have it here, was the last moon wobble in March of 2019 was when Mueller testified and released his report. So he was appointed right during the moon wobble period, and he released his report during a moon wobble period. And so you can almost track the whole time period. Let's see if we can play that. We can track that whole time period of watching those transits and looking at the eclipses and moon wobbles. You could look at Mueller's transits, and you can look at Trump's transits. I almost need to, I wonder if I can't get this any bigger. It drives me nuts. No, that's not going to help. Oh, I don't know if I dare go switch that or not. What does that do? Nope. Trying to get this thing to show bigger. Full screen. Well, it does show bigger that way. So what we wanted to look at, this is entire presidency up to 2020, and we're at a turning point, which is we look at these nodes, and this is where Mueller was appointed. And now we have the last quarter, and we're going through a moon wobble, and we're going to see the last of it, and they're going to go out of Cancer Capricorn very quickly here in this time period. This is where I think we're going to have a culmination with Trump. I think that we're going to have a major turn. Whether or not he gets impeached is another matter, but he could easily resign in December. I think in some ways, if they push far enough, that we could see a resignation with the next event, because basically this blow up about what happened with Ukraine in his conversation happened during this moon wobble. And I think just before the nodes leave Cancer Capricorn, there's going to be a major train of events, because that's when action happens, is during these eclipse periods. Let's see what we want to go through. Oh, we've covered, it's taken more time than I thought. Do we need to go through this? I think the major thing we wanted to show here was that this movable was conjunct Pluto and square Venus during the aspect that made it a more dramatic time period. And I want to go out of the slides and go over to solar fire very quickly, because I didn't have time to add to the slides. So what I wanted to do was to pull over solar fire over to here, and we wanted to pull Donald Trump over to here, and let's see if I can get this to show. Maybe this one. Let's see. Okay. So I took a lot of transits out so that we could make it all clean and neat. And what we're showing, so we have a 90-degree aspect. And here we have the lunar nodes, and they're going into cardinal. They're going into cardinal. You can see all the way back into 2018, and they're going to leave cardinal very shortly into 2020. Looks like they don't leave completely, but this last eclipse, this is the eclipse period. I think if I go back, I can, if I turn on the eclipses, I'm afraid it's going to show all of the, full moons, which will make it a little, see if I see the lunations, it's going to make it a little messy. Not too bad. So here's our last opportunity with Saturn. Notice, here we are, second quarter. That's the second quarter. Here we are in our current moon wobble, which is in third quarter. Let's see, sun and right here. And notice we've had Saturn. Saturn has done this dance for 5 months of going backwards and aligning with the nodes. And we're only now just in early October starting to see the separation. And this has been the chaos of the Mueller report meeting nothing or appearing to be nothing, and then Brexit of just coasting along with frustration after frustration. And it's not until Saturn separates from these nodes, which is happening in the month of October, that we will see. Let me wonder if I can squish this down further. Maybe if we take it just to all of this year. Oh, good. Up. The other program keeps getting activated. Let's take that to January 018. Probably 2 years. Oh, I did something wrong. Oh, we know. Jenny, we need a date in there. And we'll do it 2 years. Maybe I'll get us a better view. Looks a little bit bigger. But here, look at this congestion of the nodes with Saturn all the way. And you see here's early October. And then we just have a major separation. And that's when Brexit is happening. So we had the Supreme Court last weekend slap the hands of Boris Johnson. And remember, he's like a double, triple Gemini. And at the same time, we have this whole explosion about Ukraine and the whistleblower happening the very same week. And you watch, they may vote. They're speculating this very week because this aspect hits Boris Johnson's chart. And I think I have to pull up his data again. I don't have his I don't have his degree right now. It's on another phone. Let's see if we can get Boris shown up here for the events. Boris, real quick. JJ. Does anyone happen to have Boris's ass? Oh, here he is. Boris, here he is. Okay. Let's pull up his chart really quickly. Okay. Oh, I got things pulled over to the other side. Okay. Let's see. Let me one more adjustment. Let's see. He has the data. We only have a solar chart on him. He is June. He's another Gemini, by the way. He's June 19, 1964. And he was born, but believe it or not, he's got U.S. citizenship. He was born in New York. If you don't know, he's format New York. Oh, the time. And it was New York. And it's New York. Let's do sun first. Okay. And we have the moon wobble. We will do a bi-wheel with Johnson and the moon wobble that's happening this week. And I don't know if I can make that much bigger or not.
Click the video square corner. No? Upper right corner?
Yeah, I did. Well, so here's his chart, and we happen to see, here's the moon wobble. So here the lunar nodes are at 12, and you can see that the sun is at 13, so I'm probably off by 1 day. We're close enough. And then we look at the aspects, and you notice it's not too far from his nodes, but what's square? His Jupiter and his Neptune. And he's a Mars-Uranus personality, if I remember right. See, his Mars is at 1 and his Uranus is 6. So he's a disruptor. And he doesn't mind about tearing things apart. So you watch, because they're speculating that there's going to be a vote and he's going to lose being the prime minister next week during this moon wobble. So he's, a flash in the pan. But during this moon wobble, he had the Supreme Court declare that it was invalid to close Parliament. And two, the probability of him being voted out of office next week is very high. So watch that. And let's do the same chart for Mr. Trump. Somehow or another, these two guys are so alike, they're being tied together. Trump. But I think, they talk about how fast this impeachment's going to go. I think it's probably going to go fairly fast, but the lone card in that is Mitch McConnell, because they could do nothing, and everyone, he follows the lead. He controls the Senate, and I think they'll negotiate a resignation before that happens. So let's see, where are the notes? They're very close to his Mercury. Remember his out of bounds Mercury, and he's been tweeting like crazy, not being able to stop himself. And you know who's another Gemini? It was Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani is another Gemini too. And we see, with this, we see Mars coming to the, no, it's in Libra. It's out of aspect. Not much. I was thinking at first it was aspecting the Uranus, but that's not the case. But it is coming to aspect to Saturn. So you watch, it's going to form, which this will extend that moon wobble. Watch the Mars transit as it goes forward and meets with Sun, but squares Saturn, because we still have the nodes at 12. So we have an extra week. If I don't know if I can do the animated clock exactly here without having to animate. Doesn't always work great. Nope. I'm not going to do the animated clock. It'll take too long. If I can pull that down, close it. But you watch when we wind up having Mars come in aspect to the Sun and squaring Saturn and the nodes. This is going to prolong this eclipse period just a little bit longer, because there'll be more fireworks, because Saturn is still in alignment and the nodes haven't moved that far. So October is going to be a really interesting month. But my speculation is Boris is going to be voted out of office. And then it's what the dynamics of the two parties are going to do. I think that more than likely, I would think that they would try to avoid a full impeachment and not press it that way. I think they would probably do a negotiation of trying to get him to resign, but he won't do that unless he's given immunity and impunity from whatever they want to accuse him of. I mean, that's what Nixon did. Nixon had an entire negotiation, and if you remember, Spiro Agnew was found to be corrupt and accepting money while he was vice president, and that was exposed by accident during Watergate. And so what, Did someone say something?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at myself.
Well, this happened during Watergate. So what they had to do, because they couldn't let a corrupt vice president, they couldn't let him become President Agnew, is before they finished with Watergate, they made him resign from being vice president. Then he walked into a court and was accused of tax evasion and given a minor penalty, so that he had a criminal act against him. But he had already resigned the day before as vice president, and then they let Nixon resign, and they'd already selected Gerald Ford. So all that was negotiated and done behind closed doors. Now, what I want to say about the nodes, particularly in Cancer and Capricorn, is they represent the survival of yourself, which can be an explosion of greed if you have too much Cancer in your chart. You can never have enough money in your bank. You can never be rich enough. But the opposite of that on the water sign is Capricorn, which is laws about property rights and about containing an individual's behavior. So if you have someone that goes too far off in the behavior, you have laws to be able to restrict that. And that is the dynamic that we've been trying to rein in Trump during this time of the nodes being in Cancer and Capricorn. When they move back into Gemini and Sagittarius, that's more about social reform. So this time period of trying to constrain him or restrict him is going to fade away after this next eclipse. So if something isn't resolved in December of this next eclipse, then he'll run through the term of office. But I wouldn't be surprised if he would be even like LBJ and decide not to run when he sees he's going to lose office. But he's going to wait out for a negotiation. He wants a deal to protect himself and his businesses and his family. So this is going to be a behind the doors closed negotiation that's going to be announced probably during a weekend or during a major holiday, that's been negotiated behind closed doors between the House in the Senate, and Trump, and we'll just get it at the end of the event, just like what happened with Nixon. I think that's the most likely thing to occur, but that's my personal opinion. Do we have other questions regarding our subject? Because we're at 2:30, and I think we just about run out of time, haven't we?
Yeah, we have actually. Any questions, anyone? I've unmuted everyone. If anybody is still muted, you have to unmute yourselves.
In solar fire, how do you, I know I can come up with those graphic ephemeris, but I just don't know if I'm selecting the correct points.
Oh, well,
I don't know.
let's go up and go under dynamic.
Yep, I'm
graphic,
there.
To graphic.
Yep.
So the key is, one is you have to change what your module is, and it should be at 90 degrees. That will give you the conjunction system.
And I did that, so when I went to view it, I had 90 above and 90 below, where yours was at 0 to 90. Let's see.
Well, you have to pick transits. You have to pick transits and longitude.
Okay, hold on. Transits and longitude. Okay.
And then you want to go over to your point selection over here under transits. You want to open that up, and you can edit this. So for
Okay,
this
wait,
particular,
can you go back to that?
Okay, let me
Go there, go to transits on the right.
Okay, you want to go under transits,
Yes.
and you want to pick transits, because you can select what you're going to display for the transit.
Yeah.
And you want to go
Okay.
into select.
Okay.
Oh, why didn't I get? Oh, edit. You want to edit.
Okay.
And so this purpose, I only selected the Sun, Saturn. Why Saturn? Because it was an aspect to the nodes in this example. Uranus, Pluto, and the nodes. So you want to turn things on and off depending on how long of a period of time you're looking at. Because I was all the way down to 2 years, I wanted it simple, because if I put too much in, it'll be very messy and you won't be able to read it. But let's just, so let's pretend we're a normal person, and, oh, we didn't look at Joe Biden, did we? Let's look at Mr. Joe Biden. We'll do it now. And I'm going to put in, let's see, that's our current date. That's good enough. But let's only do 3 months. Will take us to the end of the year. No, let's do 4 months. It'll take us past the eclipse. And we're going to look at his aspects really quick. And I know that he was born during eclipse. If you'll go over here, you'll see he's a sun in Scorpio, and it's conjunct Venus, and it's with the node, and that's a square. See, it says Scorpio and Leo. That means he was born during a moon wobble, and he happens to have Uranus in aspect to it. And we happen to have a time birth on him. It's rounded. The data is November the 20th, 1942, 8:30 a.m. And I'd have to go look up the place where he was born. I think he's on astro.com if you want to look up all of his data. And we can see right here, we in October, here is the date, October 6th. That's the center of the moon wobble. Saturn. Yeah. It doesn't appear to be aspecting anything really important in his chart, but he's in the news because of this Sun Hunter. I don't have Hunter's data. It'd be very interesting right now to pull up Hunter's data, because that's the scandal part. They're trying to say that Hunter was getting $50,000 a month from Ukraine energy company, and that it was illegal, or that there's something nefarious. Supposedly, all of that has already been cleared up, but that is the rumor mill that is circulating this week. And I just bet that Hunter's got that moon wobble on his chart right now. And so we see here that we have a solar eclipse on December the 25th. We have a lunar eclipse on the January 10th. And if I put my cross right exactly here, we'll see that the moon wobble for that eclipse period is December the 30th. And it just hits his midheaven, but this is a rounded birth time. I don't trust that midheaven. How many people are born on the half hour, exactly on the half hour of an hour? It's rounded. I don't know if anyone's rectified it. Let's put up Mr. Trump really quick and view it also. And we see that the nodes are coming to his Neptune and his Mercury and his Eris. And here is the Christmas solar eclipse. Here is the moon wobble on the 30th. It hits his Mercury exact. And then here is the lunar node. So I expect an event. And notice we had the conjunction here is Saturn and the nodes, and look how Saturn is moving away so fast. So let's see what Saturn's going to do. Notice it's coming with Pluto, and during this eclipse period, we almost have Saturn and Pluto together. Now, let me add in really quick, let's add in Mars as that transit. Let's see, do we click on that? Okay, let's add Mars. Oops, I don't want that. Go back. No. Cancel. Okay, edit. Let's put in Mars because we were talking about Mars for this eclipse period, remember?
Yep.
And let's view it really fast. And we see here Mars. So here's our eclipse, the 6th, but Mars is coming in to add to the nodes on October the 22nd, and it's going across part of Trump's Neptune. So that's about deception and then him talking. So you watch, particularly when it hits around the 12th, remember the moon wobbles on the 6th and the 12th, and watch that transit of Mars. And I was hoping I was going to look over here, but you watch, in this eclipse period in here, we should see some major events because of Saturn and Pluto coming in with this eclipse period and hitting his Saturn and his Venus. So again, major events right here in this chart. So I would expect more fireworks before it leaves. It's going, when we extend this on, it's going to leave, and then it's going to start transiting all of his Gemini planets. So I hope I didn't confuse you with that information.
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, okay.
I'm playing around with it in my solar fire while you're doing it too.
Yeah. So depending on how long of a time frame, you can track these lunar nodes, but really, if you'll study your mundane events like what's happening now, you'll get such a strong flavor of how the nodes work by tracking these events with big news events. And then with personal charts, you'll learn a ton of astrology with it. So it's one of my favorite things to do is to track world events with these eclipses and moon wobbles. All right. Do we have any other classes right now? I mean, any other questions?
Well, thank you, Naomi. Is there anything else, anyone, before we wrap up?
No, just saying thank you. It was an amazing class.
Yes.
Oh, good.
You gave us a great deal.
Yes,
You did. Very generous. Thank you.
I'd love to speak sometime on out of bounds planets and on heliocentric nodes, because I think we need to use them a little bit more.
Sign me up.
Yeah. Me too. Awesome.
I will definitely keep these topics in mind, Naomi, for next year. Definitely.
All right.
Okay.
And I have that book coming out.
Oh,
still.
yes.
So
Can you tell us the name of the book again, please?
it's going to be, it's called Looking at the Moon, Moon Wobbles and Eclipses in Astrology. I don't know if this is showing.
It's on the screen right
Yes,
now.
it is.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Got it.
Um, and so it's almost about 100 years of history in there of tracking moon wobbles and eclipses. And then we're going to do a few personal charts. That's why I knew that Joe Biden was born during a moon wobble, because he was one of the people I searched. And of course, if you look at Princess Di, she was born, married, and died all during eclipse period.
Oh, wow.
So, and you can find that that the royals tend to have events happen during eclipse periods. And Prince Charles was born during or very close to a solar eclipse in early November of 1948, because we share almost a birthday with each other. So he's easy to track too. So it is well worth the study. Follow those lunar nodes across your personal chart and see what happens around you, and follow it in your houses, because it is well worth tracking. It's very strong, particularly when it's married with another transit with it. So,
Naomi, when will your book be available, or is it out now?
No, I've been moving. I am a 5-degree Scorpio sun, and Uranus has been in opposition to my sun.
Oh,
So we
yes.
have been selling houses and moving houses and going between the US and Mexico. And so I have been in an unsettled life for almost a year. So this book should have already been out. If I can, I want to have it finished by November to make it by the end of the year.
Okay.
So hopefully it just needs to be edited and some more things to be done, but I'm close. I've done 80% of the work is already done.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Naomi. If there's
You're
nothing
welcome.
else, okay. Thank you so much. And this video will be available on NCGR's YouTube channel, probably probably by Wednesday or Thursday of this week, and it will be available for about 6 weeks.
Oh, good.
Okay, so people, you can watch it again. Okay?
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Gonna end the meeting now. Bye-bye. Bye for now.